from NJ.com. This is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
Welcome aboard, Giants fans, to episode 103 of our New York Giants podcast right here on NJ.com. Talk is Cheap. I'm Joe Giglio, joined as always by James Scratch, Dan Duggan. They cover the Giants for NJ Advanced Media. They were at MetLife Stadium for Monday Night Football to watch the Giants home opener, the Giants' 10-year anniversary of the 2007 championship team that ironically started 0-2, though I don't think we're going to spin that into what happened last night as the Giants go down 24-10 at home against the Lions in a game, James, we talked about last week, they really had to have, and not only did they not have it, there's more questions than answers, and the Giants frankly look awful through 2 weeks of the season. Before we get into this, just a couple things to throw out there for the audience. The Giants have scored 13 points through 2 games, the fewest since 1947. Fewer than 20 points at 7 straight games dating back to last year. And here's the kicker. They've lost each of their first 2 games by 14-plus points. That is the first time that it's ever happened in Giants franchise history. James, there's probably 20 more stats like that we could give out. It's ugly right now.
Hey, yeah, but other than that, Joe, I mean, it's just going swimmingly. Look, the Giants, they're a mess. They're a complete mess. This is a debacle. We'll get into this later. They're going to Philly on Sunday. The season's on the line because they're not the 1998 Bills in all likelihood. It's very hard to envision, especially with this schedule they have this year, that they can start 0-3 and then climb their way back into the playoff hunt and get to the playoffs, even though the NFC East might be a division that 9-7 wins. I mean, it's bad. It's bad all around. The offensive line is horrible. The quarterback is bad. The coaching is bad. The front office did a poor job constructing this roster. There's a lot of major issues, and it's amazing that a couple of weeks ago we had major media outlets and local outlets picking this team to win the Super Bowl. I don't even know if they could beat the Jets right now. So it's pretty bleak.
So what happened, Dan? I mean, James is right. A couple weeks ago, that talk was out there. I mean, we had Jonathan Casillas on with us at Reds in Carlstadt for our 100th episode. And, I mean, he talked freely and openly with us about the expectations they had. I mean, we threw out the words Super Bowl and playoffs, and it wasn't like, he was shying away from that. Nobody around the Giants has. And yet after 2 weeks, they look like one of the worst teams in the NFL, especially offensively. Dan, what happened here? Were we all crazy, or are they just playing way down compared to where they should be playing?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I'm sitting here 2 weeks ago, predicted this team to go 11-5. I think we were all just a little bit guilty of overlooking the offensive line woes. Now, we weren't nearly as guilty as Jerry Reese and Ben McAdoo, because I think even when we had positive predictions for this team, we did point out that could be the one Achilles heel, that is the team's biggest weakness, and they didn't address it. I think, though, you kind of get caught up in some of the sexier pickups of a Brandon Marshall who hasn't done anything in his first 2 games, and Evan Engram, who actually has shown that, hey, this guy, if they could, get a little bit of blocking, he might be that weapon that they thought they were adding in the first round. You knew the defense was back. I think the defense has still been good to very good, but hasn't been great and lights out like it was last year. But there's a ton put on their plate, so I'm not pointing any blame at the defense. But I think the biggest problem is the fact that they didn't change the offensive line. My feeling was kind of like, well, hey, they went 11-5 with this offensive line last year. They added some better weapons. They have a good defense. They should be able to, do as well this year. And clearly through 2 games, that seems like flawed thinking. And the bigger problem this year is the schedule is so much tougher. I mean, these were 2 games I thought they would win. And now you really start to get to the meat of the schedule where it's, at Philly, at Tampa. I know then they got at Denver 2 weeks after that, Seattle at home. I mean, this first 7-week stretch is just brutal. And like James said, I mean, it's getting late early. I mean, if they fall 0-3, you can pretty much wrap it up. This is such a must-win on Sunday, and it's such a bad matchup because this Eagles front 7 is ferocious, and Eli Manning's been running for his life and getting sacked by defensive lines that we didn't really think were that good. And after seeing what they did to this Giants offensive line, hit the panic button, sound the alarms, whatever you need to do. Just the biggest problem is I don't know, at this point how they fix it, based on the personnel they have and based on the way McAdoo's been running this offense. So that's the biggest concern right now for me.
Yeah, next few weeks, you have Brandon Graham. 2 weeks after that, Joey Bosa, then Von Miller, then the Seahawks, then Aaron Donald. I mean, it is not going to get any easier. And James, Dan just mentioned Ben McAdoo. And Like, he's the head coach of this team. He's also the offensive coach of this team. He calls the plays. He was the guy brought in here to fix this offense. And ironically, when he was the offensive coordinator and Tom was still the head coach, the offense did look fixed. Yet since Ben McAdoo became the head coach, it's not just the offense is broken or it's bad. The Giants don't have a good offense. I mean, that's just what it is. And then after the game last night, I know Ben started that press conference by saying you put it on him, but then he goes and I think this is the most I've ever heard anyone around the Giants throw Eli Manning under the bus or criticize Eli Manning as publicly as Ben McAdoo did in that press conference on Monday night. I mean, what do you make of this head coach right now who just frankly, I think it looks like he's lost out there?
Yeah, I mean, that surprised me. And look, I've said this on the podcast before. I feel that with Eli, for the media that covers the team, for the Giants, I mean, you can kind of just heap a lot of scoring on him, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, he's so even keel. I said it before. It's like punching a pillow. Like nothing's going to happen. But that was really quite pointed and quite blunt from McAdoo. And I'll be honest with you, like, look, yes, it probably is on the quarterback that they had to delay a game in that situation. But for Ben McAdoo to sit there and stand there and basically give a full dissertation about how Eli screwed it up, and then be asked, well, why didn't you call timeout on the sideline, Ben? And then basically be like, well, the quarterback should – I mean, that's ridiculous, okay? You're the head coach of the team. And not to draw parallels, but 2 years ago in Dallas, you stood there when you were the offensive coordinator and did nothing, and he didn't take a sack, and you ended up having the Cowboys come right down the field on your worst defense in franchise history and steal a game out of your hands. So it's just like at some point, Ben, yes, Eli should have gotten the snap off. But come on, if you could break down that sequence in such eloquence and throw Eli under the bus after the game, you should have been able to call a timeout when there was 2 seconds left on the clock and go scream at Eli then, but at least have it open to you to go for that touchdown. Because look, the Giants have been inside their opponent's 10-yard line twice this season. They've gotten field goals both times. If they score a touchdown there, I think it would have made it 17-14. Do they win the game? Probably not, but it's a hell of a lot more interesting probably down the stretch than it was keeping it 17-10. So that's what I think with McAdoo. Like, it's fine. You can blame Eli. And honestly, Eli should get blamed. He hasn't played well for almost over a year now. But to sit there and basically just say that you had nothing to say, it's on me, but let me pass the blame around a little bit more now, that's weak.
Joe, my biggest problem is just how inconsistent he is when he hands out the blame pie. He threw Eli under the bus last night. He threw Odell under the bus after the kicking that thing. And now the thing is, both times I think McAdoo was speaking the truth. I mean, that's Eli's fault. I don't really even agree with James. I don't think the coach can be responsible for calling a timeout when Eli has the play clock in front of him and he's looking at it. You got to think he's going to make get the snap off. But that's beside the point. I think that was accurate criticism. I think it was fair to say that Odell was out of hand. But now when you put that stuff in the public, and granted, we want that. We want coaches to be honest, but he has to be obviously more worried about how things are going to play in that locker room. So, again, Eli, like James said, is an easy target. But don't guys have to wonder, what does Eric Flowers have to do to have a critical word uttered about him? What does Brandon Marshall have to do to have a critical word uttered about him? I mean, I don't think it's a wise way to go about it where you're just picking guys. You're going to pick on this guy, but you're going to baby this guy. You're going to take a shot at this guy. You're going to coddle that guy. I don't think that's going to play over the long term. I think they got away with a lot last year because they won. I mean, that's the ultimate deodorant. Any locker room problem gets squashed. And I'll give him credit. Even after 0-2, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some finger pointing publicly. I mean, now maybe there's stuff going on behind the scenes we don't know. They've done a very good job of still presenting a united front from top to bottom. And, all the players said the right things after the game, especially the defense, who I think we're all waiting for probably one player to pop off because it kind of has to be coming. It's just human nature. If things are so lopsided the way it is with this team right now, if you're on the defense, you have to get frustrated. So I think at some point, if this continues, that'll come out. But I just think McAdoo's playing with fire there. He has no goodwill built up with this fan base at all. I mean, listen, Eli has not played well for a year plus. I think even the staunchest Eli defenders can concede that he's not playing at a high level. They'll give you a million excuses, but I think they'll concede that. Still, they don't want the coach who basically kind of landed in this job without much of a resume to be taking shots at the 2-time Super Bowl MVP who's brought more to this franchise than, McAdoo could do if he was here for 10 years, most likely. It just doesn't sit well with fans. I mean, I'm just telling you based on what I see on social media. Eli is definitely a part of the problem, but so much of the attention and the spotlight is directed at McAdoo, and it only makes him look worse. Because I've been calling for him to take some of the responsibility. He finally did. He started his press conference saying it's on me, so I gave him a round of applause for that. But then he kind of went backwards on me there, but then throwing Eli under the bus, in the next breath. So I don't know. His leadership style worked when they won, like it does for a lot of coaches. Let's see how it's received if things keep going in this direction.
And Joe, Dan, I think you hit the nail on the head. And James, you could right after this, you could give your point. I think the nail on the head with the Eli stuff. I mean, I go back to think about what Tiki Barber. Tiki Barber is a borderline Hall of Famer, one of the great Giant players really of all time. And he carried the Giants when Eli was young and was a very inconsistent quarterback. He criticized Eli, and it's almost like he's been ostracized. Like the Giants fans don't even want to remember Tiki Barber was a Giant because he criticized Eli. I mean, it's just a bad strategy. And for everything you just said, Dan, I mean, he's accomplished what he's accomplished. He hasn't played well. He's part of the problem. But James, and you could touch on this with your point, I thought when they hired Ben McAdoo, and I thought whoever the next coach was going to be, Ben McAdoo became that guy. Part of the job was to transition this thing as Eli declined and to figure out a way to still win with Eli Manning before he really was completely washed up. That's part of Ben's responsibility. So if he can't do it, then maybe he's not the right guy for the job.
Definitely. And that's something that kind of popped in my head last night. Now, look, I'm impressed by saying Ben McAdoo is not going to get fired. Okay? I mean, he's in his second year. He made the playoffs last year. The Maras and the Tisches are very patient. That's not the Giants' way. He's fine. Look, if they go 2-14, I think everything's kind of on the table. But they're not going to go 2-14. They're going to win. They're going to win games. I don't know how many games they're going to win. But what I'm saying is McAdoo's going to be here at 99.9% certainty. But that being said, I think him and Eli are kind of tied at the hip. Remember, Ben signs a 4-year contract when he gets the job, when Eli is beginning the first year of his 4-year contract. So if Ben is going to antagonize Eli and Eli is basically just going downhill from here, then when Eli walks off, whether it's 2 years from now, 3 years from now, whenever, and the Giants' offense has been a disaster, what is John Mara going to say? I mean, how is he going to say, well, you know what? Now it's time to develop Davis Webb, or it's time for us to go get a quarterback in a draft. What's to say that Ben McAdoo is going to prove that he deserves to be the guy who gets to go on that ride? Nothing.
No, nothing at all. He has.
It's kind of interesting that a guy who he's kind of here, he basically got the job because Eli kind of turned back the clock in his 2 years as coordinator. And for him to kind of be taking these shots at Eli, and look, maybe this is the right button to push, and maybe, as we've said in the past, it's just going to, Eli's Teflon, and it's just going to roll off him, and maybe this will he'll rise to the occasion somehow. But it's a questionable strategy at best. And just because I figure we got to get into Eric Flowers at some point. Dan's right. I understand the whole idea that McAdoo is consistent and that he treats everyone differently. And maybe he thinks that criticizing Odell publicly or Eli publicly, that's the right button to push. And maybe he feels that he's not there yet with a guy like Brandon Marshall. But with Eric Flowers, I mean, I think the Giants have run out of buttons to push at this point. None of them work. So at some point you either have to criticize the guy or you just have to quietly move him someplace else. I think we're at the latter point because I don't think the Giants are ever going to do the former. But, I mean, it's astounding to me that the Flowers situation has gotten to where it is. And, yes, he's only one guy and there's 11 guys on the field and the entire offense struggles. But Eric Flowers is so painfully obvious that he is the biggest issue with this offense right now. And the Giants need to finally accept that and do something about it.
Well, I mean, this goes back to Dan. I mean, this word's thrown out a lot when people don't like coaches or don't believe in coaches or schemes or whatever. But literally, the definition of insanity is what the Giants are doing with Eric Flowers. They don't give him help. They expect different results, and it's the same thing every time. He just can't cut it right now as a left tackle in the NFL, and they have an immobile quarterback and an offense that's it's stagnant. I mean, how much longer can they continue this? It's going to derail the season.
Yeah, no, it is. I don't know how you can keep putting him out there, especially putting him out there the way they did, at least for the first half into the third quarter, one-on-one on an island with a good pass rusher. I mean, And people on Twitter, like, coaches, Brian Billick I saw, and Michael Lombardi, and I heard Gruden on the broadcast was like screaming to help him. I mean, you don't have to be a football expert to see that, but I'm saying it was obvious to all these guys who've been in the game. And again, it was obvious to the armchair quarterbacks. You cannot leave a guy who's such a liability on an island time after time. Where is the chips from the running backs? Rhett Ellison, you gave this guy $18 million. My goodness, that seems like a waste of money. He doesn't even play. But wasn't he supposed to be someone who could help pass block? Now, I never bought into that. I don't think you sign a tight end to basically be your sixth offensive lineman and babysit the left tackle. But it's probably worth a shot at this point because clearly Flowers can't hack it. And with the McAdoo, I don't think it would be right for McAdoo to criticize Flowers. I think it'd probably be right for him to probably just tone down the criticism in general because I don't think that really benefits you a lot. Again, as reporters, we ask the questions, and if you give them to us, we run with them. It's a headline, and we're happy. I don't think it's right in their best interest. So him, dumping on Flowers would only make it worse. So I think he's probably doing the right approach, but it's also kind of insulting to our intelligence when he gets asked a question directly about Flowers and says, oh, it's not just one guy. I mean, you can at least word things in a way that acknowledges the problem. Like Justin Pugh, I kind of tip my cap to him because he handled things very well as a teammate last night. He didn't defend Eric Flowers' play because, again, we all have eyes. You can't just lie to us and say, oh, he's playing well. You guys don't know what's going on, blah, blah. He didn't really touch his play. He said, listen, the kid knows he's not doing what he wants to do, what he's supposed to do. And then Pugh just kind of got his back saying it's tough. He's getting all this scrutiny. It only makes it worse. No, I mean, hey, Pugh can say that. It's not going to stop what anyone's going to write and what fans are going to think. But, that was a way to get his back without just insulting our intelligence of saying, oh, you don't know. It's not all Flowers. I mean, we see plays where, they do the slow motion replays and it's him and Ansah one-on-one and he just, goes around him like it's a fire cone. It's just brutal to watch. And I don't know how you can justify keep putting him out there. The problem it's going to come back to, and I think we're going to get into it, is there's no other option. And it shouldn't be a surprise that he's this bad because he was this bad for his first 2 years. They didn't address it. And again, they don't even seem to address it in games. They're going to have to start giving him some help. If they're not going to make a drastic move like putting Pugh at left tackle, which I don't think they'll do, they have to at least scheme around him a little bit. You can't just kind of cross your fingers and hope that he's magically going to learn how to block in his third season.
So, James, what are the options here? I know you wrote about some ideas for the Giants if they really want to consider everything to fix this offense because it's broken. I mean, they haven't scored over 20 points in a game since last November in Cleveland against the Browns. That is an eternity in the NFL, especially for a team that has a two-time Super Bowl quarterback, a all-world wide receiver, has Sterling Shepard as a promising player, drafted a tight end in the first round, signed Brandon Marshall, who we'll get into. I mean, just looks totally disengaged, but it's ridiculous how inept they are at scoring points. How do they fix it?
When it starts with Eric Flowers, I mean, the only good option is sitting in wherever the heck the Rams have their facility now in California, protecting Jared Goff's blind side. Okay, this team should have signed Andrew Whitworth in free agency when they had the chance to, and yes, they could have done it. They could have done it. They could have kept JPP. They could have made the salary cap work if it meant that they had to cut DRC. I know Giants fans love DRC, and they get very upset when we mention the idea of getting rid of DRC, but he's a 30-something cornerback who makes a lot of money. Which would you rather have, Andrew Whitworth and maybe Cody Sensabaugh as your slot cornerback, or DRC and Eric Flowers as your left tackle? I think that's a pretty easy decision to make. But the Giants did make that decision, and we'll get to Jerry Reese later on, I'm sure. So this is what they have. I think they should put Pugh at left tackle. It's not fair to Pugh. He's a left guard. That's what he's going to play. It might kind of grease the skids maybe for Pugh to leave in free agency. But look, that he's their best lineman. Left tackle is the most important spot on the offensive line. If you're going to put him at right tackle and rejigger your entire offensive line when Bobby Hart's ankle gives out 2 snaps in, why not just go all the way and put Pugh at left tackle, put Flowers at right tackle? Look, that's not going to fix his technique problems, but you got to put him somewhere. Or if you think Hart can get healthy and play, put Flowers on the bench. You don't have a real swing tackle on this team. You have Chad Wheeler, who – this is amazing, guys. Chad Wheeler and Geno Smith were the only 2 Giants that did not play against the Lions. Obviously, Geno didn't play. He's the backup quarterback, so unless Eli gets hurt, he's not going to play. But how do you have a swing tackle on your roster that you will not put in a game? I mean, it makes no sense. The fact that Bobby Hart got hurt and the Giants had to put their backup guard at left guard and put their left guard at right tackle because their only other tackle on the roster is an undrafted rookie that they just won't even put in a game. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And that falls on the general manager. How do you build – that's not how you build a roster. If you have a roster that requires musical chairs when one guy gets hurt, then you don't have a very good roster. So, look, I don't think the Giants are going to move Flowers. I think they're hell-bent on keeping him there. It's not fair to him. It's not fair to the team. But this is what they've decided to do. This is what they've done. They have no options, and I think they're stuck.
Well, then they're screwed because the coach is rigid and won't do anything here. And, Dan, as James just said, the GM, Jerry Reese, gave Ben McAdoo this team to work with. And, you know, Jerry Reese built this team in the offseason almost like a fantasy football team. There were extra wide receivers. You go out and get a tight end / wide receiver in Ingram in the first round. And we had this conversation, 20 times since the end of last season. They ignored the biggest hole. And, in the game, we're watching the game, Monday Night Football, you guys are there. We're watching Eric Flowers get run around. We're watching Ben McAdoo on the sideline look just completely clueless. But the guy upstairs that isn't being shown on TV, the guy upstairs that is watching this thing is Jerry Reese, but his fingerprints are on this mess. Yeah,
I mean, I have a few thoughts. I'll go back to something James said I agree with wholeheartedly. It's really not Eric Flowers' fault. I mean, for all, intents and purposes, he's trying. He's just not very good. So, I mean, if you put me at left tackle, and even if you gave me $10 million, I still wouldn't be able to block an NFL defensive end. Now, granted, I know it's not an apples to apples comparison. But the point being, if you put someone who's overmatched in a position and they fail, it's kind of hard to blame the guy who's overmatched. He's at most he's a right tackle. He might be a guard. He might be a backup. He might be out of the league in 2 years. We don't know. But it's clear that he's not an NFL left tackle. So at some point you have to stop putting all the vitriol at Flowers, especially when the Giants spent all offseason trumpeting how hard he worked in the offseason. My goodness, imagine if he didn't work hard. What would it look like? Because these are the results when he supposedly was, in that gym every day, just, working. So that aside, to Jerry Reese, it's funny because he does kind of slide under the radar. I know there's a certain pocket of the fan base who doesn't let anything slide under the radar with Jerry Reese, but he's not on the field. He's not in the press conference. He talks very rarely. So he kind of put the team together in the offseason. He's in the crosshairs in free agency and the draft. But then when the season gets going, it's easy to kind of lose sight. But I don't think that's going to happen this year because, again, this offensive line was the one thing that stood out like a red flag all offseason that needed to be addressed. And the fact that they just didn't even come close to addressing, even if they had brought in a veteran left tackle to potentially push Flowers or Hart, and it didn't work out, you could say, oh, well, I mean, they went with, DJ Fluker, who had, flamed out in the Chargers, and he's so far down the depth chart that he seems to be behind Chad Wheeler, an undrafted free agent. He's clearly behind Brett Jones. You can't push any of these starters. So, that was basically, I don't know.
He's a more expensive Will Beatty. That's what he is.
Exactly. I don't know how else to describe it. I mean, it was a complete flyer, and clearly they didn't see anything, and they have no faith in him. The only draft pick they used was a 6th-round pick on Adam Bisnavati, who, didn't even make the team out of camp. So they just didn't make any moves to address such a glaring weakness. And I don't even know if they need to, I'm not going to go revisit the entire spending of the offseason. I don't even know if they needed to cut DRC. I think they could have made the money work with Whitworth. Otherwise they were supposedly going to give Jonathan Hankins 3 years, $24 million. That's almost, would have given you a good chunk of the Whitworth money. You cut JT Thomas. You don't sign Red Ellison, who doesn't play anyways. There's a lot of ways. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to find a few bucks under the the sofa cushions when it comes that close. I mean, you can't go and sign a guy for $100 million, but Whitworth wasn't looking for that much money. But I mean, Jerry Reese, it's such a flawed way they built this team. Everybody knows Eli Manning is to use Jerry's words on the back nine, and he's never been the most mobile quarterback. And you have a pass happy offense. You didn't invest in the run game. And you're going to put him behind a leaky offensive line. It just doesn't make any sense. That had to have been the priority. Now, granted, they have used some early draft picks, and Pugh's worked out pretty well. Richburg's been okay. Flowers have been a disaster. But to just not fortify that offensive line when you have an aging quarterback who's not mobile, but you're going to throw the ball 75% of the time, it just makes no sense. Now, what we're seeing is the results, of these deficiencies. Now, again, I still think there's a chance that they can kind of right the ship. I mean, I think this game on Sunday obviously is huge. I think it's hard to remember that this team was 2-3 last year when Odell, saved them from basically going off a cliff. So you never know. Things can change quickly in the NFL. But if it does continue down this path, I think the finger probably has to be pointed first to Jerry, because we saw these problems all last season. They were begging to be addressed all offseason, and they just never were. So you can't sit there and say, how did this happen? Well, I mean, you kind of could see the seeds were being sown and just didn't address it. So I think that is going to be where the most blame goes if this season continues, the way it's trending right now.
All right, let's look at this season now moving forward, and specifically if, James, they can somehow right this ship. And, Giants fans like to hearken to the past. I'm not talking about the 80s. I'm talking about the more recent past. Obviously, 2017 was honored. They were 0-2. The 2011 team, there were similarities between those two teams and how they got in and made their run. Now, those teams had two things that this team doesn't have, or at least on one they don't. The other we don't know yet. They don't have Tom Coughlin, and the Giants rallied around Tom, and he found a way to prepare them for games, and they got up for games when their back was against the wall. I don't know yet about Ben. We're going to find out a lot on Sunday. I'm not a big believer in Ben McAdoo and as the head coach of his team. The other thing that those Giants teams had, they had Eli Manning, especially the 11 team. I mean, he won a lot of games, and he pulled a lot of rabbits out of his hat. He doesn't look like he can do that anymore, James. I mean, Ben McAdoo might be able to change the scheme a little bit. They might be able to shuffle the offensive line. Eli's the quarterback. How big of a problem, when you watch Eli right now, is he?
It's tough for me to say because, on one hand, the results are clear. He's struggled mightily since going back to the start of last season. On the other, and I think you guys see this too, physically, you don't see a decline. I mean, he still seems to be throwing the ball well. He's not terribly mobile, but, I mean, he's never been very mobile, so I don't know how much of that is an issue. The offensive line, I mean, he's constantly under duress. So on one hand, I say to myself, it's simple. Just look at what you're seeing, and what you're seeing is a 36-year-old quarterback who's begun the backslide. On the other hand, I think if the physical skills are still there, if he still has a strong arm, if they can somehow get him a little bit more protection, maybe he can beat Eli. And what I say about Eli is he's never been, an elite regular season quarterback. So you're going to have throws like the throw to Ingram that got picked off. I mean, that's just going to happen. He's going to have his stinker games. But the problem is, in 2015, Eli would have a stinker game, then he'd have a really good game. We don't really get the really good game anymore. We just get stinker games and, just kind of their games. So I'm hesitant to bury Eli completely, but I'm also very hesitant to do what other people are saying and just think that somehow he's going to snap out of this and put his cape on and he's going to save this team.
Yeah, it's hard to think he is. I mean, I'm looking at the Giants year-by-year record, and look, basically every year from when he took over, Dan, in 2005, he became that was his first year as a full starter, through 2012, which is an 8-year run. They never had a losing record, not one time. A couple 500s, a couple good seasons, obviously the Super Bowl, 2 Super Bowls, but they never had a losing record. And now I'm looking at it, 13, 14, 15. Last year they had a really good year, it bounced back. But if they don't win this year, we're going to be saying, 4 to 5 years, he's been the quarterback of a team with a losing record. It's just a weird thing. Last year feels like a blip compared to what Eli's career has now turned into, which is it's not very good anymore.
Right. Although then you also go back a couple of years when McAdoo first got here, and he was really good, and the defense was terrible. So he's had one of the more unique careers. I think everyone can agree on that. I mean, it's really been amazing. The thing I've always said about him is his ceiling is very high and his floor is very low. Like for a good quarterback, a very good quarterback, is rare to have such a discrepancy from your best and your worst, and he can yo-yo like nobody else. But it goes back to what I was saying. I just think that it's a flawed team. He needs to be behind a good offensive line. Now, if you want to say that's a flaw of his, well, I mean, you already gave him the money, so he's going to be the quarterback. So you have to plan accordingly. You can't say, well, why doesn't he run more? Because he's Eli Manning. That's not what he does. So you have to you build the team around a quarterback, and especially one like him who's been here for so long. You've known for years this is going to be our guy to take us into when they gave him a 4-year extension when he was whatever he was, 34, 35 years old. You knew what you were signing up for. So it's hard to say that it's kind of Eli's fault that he's not more elusive in the pocket. The one thing I'll say, I thought as the game wore on Monday night, he actually did hang in the pocket a little bit better, and he paid the price. I mean, there's that one play where he got absolutely pile driven when he somehow got the ball to Sterling Shepard, where he got just crushed as he threw and the ball flowed in the air. But it was kind of telling that was one of their best offensive plays when it was just a complete desperation heave. And he made another play where I think he stepped up in the pocket and found Jarrell Adams for a deep ball down the sideline. He threw a great pass to Brandon Marshall down the sideline. He threw a good pass to Evan Ingram late. That would have been a tough catch, but first round pick, you get a hard hit at the goal line. You're a tight end. We'd like to see you hold on to that ball, and that's a different game. Might have been a touchdown to bring it within a score. So I thought he was bad, very bad against Dallas. I thought he was up and down a little bit, but I thought he did hang in the pocket a little better. But then you see that hit I'm talking about on the pass to Shepard. You don't want him taking those hits. So once in a while, when he does kind of throw the ball into the ground, maybe a little bit prematurely, it's sort of the balance. I mean, because you don't want him reliving the NFC Championship game against the 49ers every week, because you'll never make it. And then if you think Geno Smith's going to be a better option behind this line, I think you'd be in for a rude awakening. So I don't know. I mean, with Eli, it's such a polarizing guy where some people want to put all the blame on him, some people don't want to put any blame on him. I think I come somewhere in the middle. I think there definitely needs to be some blame. We can't excuse as James said, the interception was a terrible throw. He had time in the pocket, but I just keep going back to it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. Does he not trust his offensive line? That makes him play bad. I'm inclined to believe that is a big part of it. Now you might say, well, hey, you still got to overcome it, and you don't get a pass just because you have a bad offensive line. But I do think just in the reality of it, that's the biggest factor. I think that's really made him look so bad in this last year plus.
Now, can the defense save the day, James? I think that's the question. I mean, the offense has to be better. They can't play like this the entire season, and anyone could expect them to reel off 10-4 the next 14 games or win enough to get to the playoffs. But can the defense save the day? They've played well the first couple of weeks. Dan mentioned earlier, it's like we're not talking about them the way we did last year because the results are different in terms of wins and losses. But the defense is playing well enough to hold up. I mean, if they just play competently on offense, they should win some games. It starts this week against the Eagles, whose offense has moved the ball, but they have issues on the offensive line. They can't run it. They've struggled to protect Wentz. I mean, this should be a spot where the Giants defense could ugly this game up and maybe give them a chance. Are they good enough to save this season while the offense gets going, or is the offense so bad it might be a lost cause?
Yeah, Giants fans don't want to hear this, but I don't think the defense can save the season like that. Just because I look at this, I mean, they've scored 13 points through 2 games. This is not a Giant. This is a Giant. Look, the Giants defense is very good. It was very good last year. But they were giving up 10, 17 points a game. Well, they're looking at a team now where it's almost like they got to hold a team to under 10 points to have a chance. And they're just not that type of defense. The pass rush is inconsistent. They've got some holes in the secondary when they have injuries. The linebacking situation. It's a very good defense. It's not an elite defense that's just going to totally smother you. And this year, now that they're kind of struggling against a run, I think it's been kind of magnified a bit. I don't think they're good enough. Yes, if the Giants' offense can start to punch around 20 points a game somehow, then definitely the defense can kind of carry a little bit more of the load and they can start winning again. But to ask this defense to save the season, you're basically like, all right, they're going to Philadelphia on Sunday. If the Eagles score 13 points, are the Giants going to win that game? I don't think so. I don't know.
Well, that's ugly. It's the truth, though. Based on what they've been this year, and based on what they were the last 5, 6, 7 games last year, it's a fair assessment of what the Giants are right now. Dan, let's look forward here. Sunday, 1:00, Lincoln Financial Field, Giants at the Eagles. I have 2 thoughts on this, and they go against each other. The first is the Giants are cooked. They can't block. Eli's going to get killed. They're just going to get destroyed by an Eagles team that's probably out for blood with maybe the best pass rush in the NFL. My other thought is it's the NFC East. We've seen this story before where a team has a bad couple weeks and then they bounce back against a division opponent on the road sometimes and everything gets jumbled in the division again. What's your feel right now on the game that probably determines the Giants season?
Yeah, no, it doesn't feel real good. If this team is gonna, obviously make a run, it has to start this Sunday, and maybe we'll be talking about it somewhere down the road that this is when it all turned around because everything is stacked against them. It's going to a place where they've had very little success recently. Even if you go back to last year when the Giants were, a better team and were playing for everything, and the Eagles were playing for nothing, and they went down there in Week 16 and got smacked around. It's just a terrible matchup. The Eagles' strength with their pass rush. Watching that game that they played on Sunday, Eli Manning's probably sitting on his couch, spiking their moat, just getting ready to get rid of the ball because, they were in the backfield all day, and I can't imagine what that's going to be like against this Giants offensive line. All that being said, the Eagles didn't win the game. They're not the perfect team. Their offense has some question marks. It's just funny. You go on NJ.com. You could cover up the coach's name and ask if the question is about Ben McAdoo or Doug Peterson because they're both kind of in the crosshairs for their offensive shortcomings and play calling and all this type of things. And, very similar boats as, second-year coaches that, are in tough markets. So it's not as if the Eagles are this juggernaut that's unbeatable. And I'm not trying to build them up like that. I just feel like it's just a really bad matchup for the Giants. But listen, it wouldn't shock me at all if they go in there and win. I mean, Odell presumably will be closer to 100%. That's, obviously the ultimate X factor in any Giants game. Maybe the team does dig deep and has some pride. I mean, I think the expectation is that, B.J. Goodson and Janoris Jenkins will be back. That'll obviously help the defense a little bit more. But there's no way you can go in feeling good, about this matchup for the Giants. So it's basically, if this team is kind of built of, what they've said they're built of, all off season, and if they have, Super Bowl medal, they're going to have to show it this Sunday because, time's running out for them to live up to these lofty expectations.
It is, James. The line on this game in Vegas was Eagles favored by 3.5 before the Giants took the field on Monday night, which is basically means it's a toss-up game. The Eagles get the 3 points for home field, but it's Vegas says they're pretty even. It's 6 as we have this conversation on Tuesday afternoon. I mean, the people who do this kind of stuff said, "Oh boy, the Giants are bad. This looks like an Eagles victory." When you look at the game, and obviously everything rides on this one because I just can't imagine the Giants could go 0-3 and rebound. Like, if they don't win this week, the season is probably over considering the expectations they had.
Yeah, I think 6 is a little bit too high. That's just me. I think maybe Vegas is going to make some money off some people who are kind of reacting off of Monday night. But I think the Eagles are – look, I picked the Eagles to win the East coming into the season. I think they're clearly the better team. They're 1-1, but I think their 1-1 is the best 1-1 in the division because they were so competitive in Kansas City against the Chiefs over the weekend. I look at this game and look, if the Giants can somehow find a way to win the game, and Dan's right, everything is kind of riding against them going to this matchup, then I think that the first 7 games is very difficult. But if the Giants can get to the bye at 3-4 somehow, which would mean they go 3-2 over the next 5, which I don't think it's likely at this point, but it's not impossible if you figure if they somehow beat the Eagles and maybe they beat the Chargers at home and maybe split either the Bucs trip, which, we saw the Bucs play the Bears, so I think it's too early to make major judgment on them, or they somehow beat the Seahawks in Week 7 in what will be maybe the worst display of offensive line play in the history of the NFL. I mean, that's going to be like a demolition derby. I mean, honestly, like the Giants should probably activate Davis Webb for that game just because there's a chance they might have to get to that guy at some point. If they get to the bye at 3-4, then they come out with that Rams-Niners stretch. I mean, you could conceivably say, okay, you've got a shot to kind of put yourself back into contention by, the stretch run. If they lose this game, they're done. I mean, there's no way that they're going to run the table after losing to Philly and starting 0-3 before the bye week. There's a lot of tough games coming. We said when we previewed the season, you got 3 division games and the final 4 all at home. Were they going to actually be in the race to take advantage of that? It's looking pretty dicey right now. So I think they got to get out. They got to hope Odell's 100%. I don't know why he played on Monday night. I thought that was a major risk to put him out there to play 30 snaps and really have no impact in the game. Made no sense to me, but they did it. They got through it, so now they have to hope he's 100%. They got to fix their offense somehow. I don't know how it can be fixed in 6 days, but that's why Ben McAdoo is a head coach, and that's why he gets paid the big bucks. And their defense is going to have to buckle up and realize that they might have to hold the Eagles to 12 points if they're going to have any chance to win. So this is kind of a circle the wagons week in game for the Giants, and I don't think they have a very good chance of winning it. But I've been wrong before, so we'll see if they prove me wrong.
Yeah, we all have. We all picked the Giants to go to the playoffs. They're 0-2 right now. I mean, it's been a couple weeks of everyone being wrong. This is going to be a fascinating game. Giants, Eagles, 1 o'clock Sunday. We'll be back next week to break it down and talk about a team that's teetering on the brink of just an awful season, or one that had their best win in probably about a year, and they rally around McAdoo and Eli and everyone in that locker room. It's going to be fun. James, as always, thanks for doing this.
You got it, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Joe.
And thanks to all of you for listening to episode 103 of Talk is Cheap. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, anywhere you listen to podcasts. We're there, including YouTube, and, of course, on NJ.com. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you guys next week.